So I'm going to pass this off to the genius Jason, also known as Professor Pothead. And God.
Oh my God, what a hell of an intro, but definitely not a genius. The Inca, they had many predecessors, but like growing up, I remember in school, I was taught that their predecessors were the Wari and the Chacapoya. But the Wari coexisted with them. That's what you and I were discussing earlier. And so, I mean, that couldn't have been one of the people that they came from. But anyway, let's kind of skip that because there's no real definitive answer of who they came from. Basically, there were a lot of different tribes around that time. The Nazca, the Paracas, the Wari, the Chacapoyas. The Incan Empire, it covered the countries of Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Ecuador, and Colombia. It was in all those different parts. Yeah, I mean, just about from the top to bottom. The mountains kind of go through there and kind of separate it from Brazil and stuff. Yeah. There's a lot of natural, barriers there. So, yeah, I mean, they were pretty much more on the coast, but they covered a large area. They had a hell of an empire. It covered 775,000 square kilometers. And wow, I pulled that out of my booty.
During that time, was there still like just random tribes?
Oh yes, all over. And see, what made them so strong was that they started off there in Peru in Cusco, about 15-20 miles south of Cusco, and that's where they say that the Incan Empire began around the year 1200. That's the best guess we have for it. So, but they started conquering people, and that's what made them strong. And they have what's called the Inca Road, which covers almost that entire area that we were just talking about, from Colombia down to Chile. The road system, though, is what made their empire. Okay, they go in, they conquer somebody, and they set up these supply houses in view where everybody can see them, so that they can see the wealth of the Inca, But inside these storehouses, they have food, they have weapons, they have armor, and the road allows them to be able to move their army. That's highway systems are, it's something that every conquering nation has to have. So the Inca Road, I'm not going to get into whether or not they built it right now, but that's what it's called, the Inca Road. It was, I've heard different estimates of how long it was. I even saw on Google, I love this one, 25,000 miles long. Okay, South America is not 25,000 miles long, so I don't know where they got that one. Maybe they meant 2,500, but yeah, I think that's what it is. The best guess is like 2,500 miles or kilometers. I've seen both, miles and kilometers. Around 1200 AD, the Inca Empire comes out. They had the first emperor, and at the moment I'm blank on his name. I know it, but I can't call it to mind right now. Forgive me for that one. I should have known that. But anyway, he starts the civilization, and their religion, which plays a major part in all of the South American and even North American tribes. They all have distinct religions, and the Incas, they practiced sacrifice, but not to the extent that the Maya and the Aztec did. They did, but it was usually in times of famine or drought or in extreme cases. But they were not beyond sacrificing children and women. They didn't discriminate at all. But having said that, I brought up the religion part because their founding religion or whatever says that their god Viracocha is their creator god. They have a bunch of different gods. I'm not good with all the different gods, but so you have Viracocha, the creator god. You have Inti, the sun god. Those are your two major gods. But Apparently, Inti gave the first two people a golden staff. He threw it, and it landed in what is the village of blah blah blah, because I can't say it. I'm not going to try, but it's about 15 miles south of Cusco, Peru. And that is where they say the Inca Empire began. And that's, right around 1200 AD. But then you have Ilapa, the god of thunder. I just throw that out there because Thor's popular right now, in the MCU and everything. You have Kukulkan, the Mayan god. You have Viracocha, the Incan. And you have the Aztec god, who is Quetzalcoatl. And they all mean the same thing. Plumed serpent god, or feathered serpent god. They're all white with a plume of feathers, and usually depicted with a beard. Sounds like a Caucasian person to me. The Inca were always ruled by like an emperor. He's called the Sapa Inca. He's the ruler. And man, they had just like complete control. They were dictators, They were just, a dictator 800 years ago is the only difference. They had complete control over people, life or death. The Inca, like you mentioned earlier, man, most of the tribes, while they have distinctive names and natures and things, they all have so many similarities, and they have shared gods, like I was just talking about with the Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl, which are fun words to try to get your tongue to say. I love Quetzalcoatl. Wow. But anyway, they all have these similarities, but they all seem to have evolved differently. So maybe at one time, maybe they had a single parent race, which brings me to the first thing I'd actually like to talk about, which is Corral Supe. Corral Supe is a very ancient pyramid that is found in Peru. They found it in the early 90s, and it predates the Great Pyramid of Egypt on the Giza Plateau. And but no, it's actually a century older, at least a century older than Giza. I've heard that the Egyptians are trying to rearrange their datings to make theirs the oldest. They still want to have the oldest pyramid, but Corral Supe is clearly at least a century older than traditional dating says. Okay, but so there were people there building megalithic sites 5,000 years ago, basically. We're talking about 4,600 years ago, 4,500 years ago. If they were doing that, and like I said, the Inca Road, I'm not so sure that the Inca actually built it, and we know they didn't build Tiahuanacu or Pumapunca, which is both in Bolivia, and they're both megalithic constructions and two of the most fabulous sites. But, there were clearly people there building things before, and in my personal opinion, besides Tiahuanacu and Pumapunca, I think they also built Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu. These are some of the megalithic sites that they get credit for, and I just really don't think that they built it. I think that they did what I think the Egyptians did. They came in, they saw all of these fabulous constructions that were there, these impressive megalithic constructions that are cut phenomenally, 6, 7, 8, up to 14 sides, and fit perfectly next to the block next to it. And we're talking about huge stones, not something little, Chris. We're talking about these big, huge boulders. And they're saying that they were cut at the quarry, and that they carried them there and fit them together perfectly with no mortar, and that the Inca did this. A Stone Age culture, well, bronze, they have bronze tools. Not even bronze. They had copper chisels. My bad. Anyway, a civilization that had not hit the Iron Age. That's my point. And they're saying that they cut these stones, that we would use diamond tip saw blades, with CIC, computer cutting tables to do it today. It would be an extravagant, expensive thing to do. And they say these guys did it with ropes and, little copper chisels, brass chisels. It's just not feasible. I don't see it. And in many cases, like in Machu Picchu, you can see the distinctive 2 or 3 different types of architecture. And this is not to take anything away from the Incas, because I think they did phenomenal things just like the Mayan and the Aztec. I just don't think they do everything they're attributed with. Now that I've had my little rant, I'm going to get on to the Inca. Because they did do cool stuff. Within the height of their empire only lasted a century. Their entire civilization only lasted 350 years or so. From the year 1200 to, I think 1372 is the official end date. But Francisco Pizarro came, well, we'll get into that in a little while when he comes in with his Spaniards. But, basically they were a civilization for 350 years, and they conquered and had the biggest empire in the Americas, and still the biggest empire that the Americas has ever seen, as far as we know. It covered more territory, it included more people, and I'm terrible with numbers. I forget how many people. I was really shocked that I recalled the number of square kilometers, the 775,000 that territory that they had. I'm not sure where I pulled that out of. I think it was something we were watching earlier. I think they mentioned it because, man, I'm bad with numbers and dates. That's not my forte. But, they had an interesting culture. It was centralized around their religion and language. And they had a rigid social structure like a caste system, like the Indian caste system, You have your ruler, then you have your nobility, then you had your peasants, and then you had slaves. And the slaves usually got sacrificed. That's all any of them that had sacrifices, that's usually who got, killed. But sometimes it would be their own, women and children, like we were talking about earlier. It's kind of sad, but, and that we talked about the different gods. They had a whole pantheon of gods, the ones that controlled the water and the rains and the fertility and this, that, and the other. And I don't remember all the gods. I mentioned, the main ones that I know, Viracocha and Inti and Alapa, but I never got into their whole religion, so I can't really talk about that too much. And like I said, they did practice human sacrifice, but it wasn't as widespread as the others. It was usually just in times of drought and famine. The thing about that, though, they would they had a alcoholic drink called chicha beer, and it was only like 5% alcohol, but the Incan victims are all found with that and chocolate, like left with them, like they had it before they died. They found these I think it's 4 kids and 2 women in Peru in the Andes mountain. A lot of the Incans were in the mountains, Machu Picchu's on the top of a mountain. They found and was able to test it somehow, and they found that they had the beer and chocolate, before they had been sacrificed. So, mummies, that's what it was. They'd been mummified. That's how they got the contents or whatever. But apparently that was the thing with the Inca, that they would actually, give them the best stuff they had. right before sacrificing them. One of the things I find fascinating, weird, and one of the reasons I don't think that they could make any kind of megalithic construction is because they had no written language and no alphabet. They didn't have the wheel. If they had the wheel, they didn't use it. They had no kind of pack animals. So that all leads, against them being able to have any kind of heavy construction like that. The wheel was known in Central and South America, but it wasn't in any kind of use like a vehicle, like a chariot or a wagon. It was used in kids' toys. Weird fact. What they did have was called Kupi. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but what it is a complicated system of knots and cords, and the way they knotted it, and I think they could use different colors in it. I don't understand it completely. They have examples of it, but that exist, but they don't know how to translate it or to read it. But apparently the Inca did. The way they placed certain knots would mean things. They could send messages with them, send and receive messages. It's weird, but that was the only thing they had. So I don't see how someone without a written system and with numbers and letters and stuff would be able to make exact cuts into. But I mean, think about it. With a modern day tape measure, we can get down to just the tiniest fractions of an inch and make precise measurements and stuff. But how do you do that and cut a 14-sided rock without any way of marking it, describing it, or a foreman? If an architect or a foreman is going to tell a worker, hey, we've got a 14-sided one up here, we need blah blah blah. I mean, you would have to have some way of writing it down to communicate. That's all I'm getting at. That was why I bring up their stuff again. I wasn't really trying to rant on that again. I was just getting that they didn't have a written alphabet. The Maya was one of the few that we know, or the only one really that we know of, that had a written alphabet. And I've seen examples of them using fire to stress granite or limestone or whatever. They were doing it in a quarry in Egypt, and they were showing how you can use heat. You build a fire on it, and how you can crack stone. And we were watching on Namadal the other night how they say that they used fire to crack those stones off, to make the pillars. But you can't do that. You can do that to separate stone, sure, but you can't make precise cuts with it. That goes back to, again, they had no iron, and they definitely didn't have diamond tip saws that we know of, rotating blades and all that good stuff. But anyway, I digress again. But yeah, the only animals that they had domesticated were llamas, alpacas, ducks, and guinea pigs. And we modern people would find eating guinea pigs a bit strange, but they raised them for food. And like
still places they eat guinea pigs all the time.
Probably in Central and South America.
I watched it.
Yeah, because they've been doing it for.
It's like, oh, cute little guinea pigs. Oh, okay, you're eating them.
They've been eating them for centuries. But with like I was talking about earlier, they didn't have any large beast of burden or anything. All they had was llamas and alpacas, and you can't pull heavy carts or anything like that with those. They didn't have beast of burden. They didn't have oxen or anything like that. But no wheels. And they mostly had a vegan diet. They were great agriculturalists. I don't know. I have my doubts on whether or not they made any of the terraces that they reportedly made, but they definitely used them. They knew how to grow. They knew how to grow at what would grow at different altitudes on the mountain. They're growing on the side of a mountain, and they would have it terraced off. Well, in this section, maybe potatoes grew, and on the next section, maybe it was yams or whatever, and then down here on the bottom one, they had to have, that's where they had the maize, the corn, or whatever. I don't know what it was, but they had it to where they knew that each level grew something better, than the other. It grew this better than that. So they did a lot of that. Something I left out, the Inca had 3 rules, and I love their rules. It simplifies everything. The Christians have their 10 commandments, but then, they add on, 9 million things. If you're Jewish, you have all these, you can't eat pork, you can't do this, you can't do that, you gotta be circumcised, you gotta do this, you gotta have, they have 9 million rules. Well, the Inca was simple. They had 3 rules. It pretty much covers everything. You follow these 3 rules, and as far as I'm concerned, you're not gonna bother anybody. Don't lie, don't steal, and don't be lazy. That's just 3 rules we should all live by. That's great rules, man. At the height of their empire, it was thought that they ruled over 10 million people, over that vast distance from Colombia down to Chile. And that was they really were an empire. I mentioned earlier they were ruled by the Sapa Inca, the emperor, or whatever, king. But the royalty, like in more modern day time, well, maybe not modern day, but by modern I mean a century ago, and all throughout history, royalty had a tendency of marrying their cousins and sisters and whatever. Well, the Inca did it too. Funny thing is, to me, I find it ironic that they would marry their sisters and cousins or whatever, but it was illegal for the peons to do it. The peasants couldn't marry their relatives. It was illegal. It's a weird rule to have. But talked about Alante Tombo. Didn't talk about Sacsayhuaman. Sacsayhuaman it was a fortress. It means, Sacsayhuaman translates to mean Fortress of the Falcon. And, or at least that's the best thing I got out of it. But it's definitely a megalithic site. It's on the outskirts north of Cusco. They were based around Cusco. And it's definitely a fortress. And it was the oldest pottery there dates from around 900 AD. But it has some of the most amazing rock work that you see, and all that's left is not what was there when the Spanish got there. What you see today is just the remnants. It's just what the Spanish couldn't tear down. They tore down the tops of it all the way down to the bottom, and it's probably like the last 20 feet or so they couldn't break. They couldn't get apart. It's too big. There was a Spanish chronicler. His name was Pedro Cieza de Leon. I'm sure I destroyed his name. But in 1533, he wrote something, and I want to read a part of it. He's describing Sacsayhuaman, and he says, "The Spanish have so pillaged and ruined it that I should be sorry to have been guilty of the fault of these in power who have permitted so magnificent a work to be so ruined. They have not considered the time to come, for it would have been better to have preserved the edifice than to have put a guard over it for all eternity." I added for all eternity. But yeah, I mean, he was so amazed by it that he was like, the people in power, they shouldn't have did what they did. What they should have done was preserved it and guarded it for future. It was so, he was just awestruck by it. That's all you can say. But it was just it's a really, really interesting site, and one I would love to visit one day. The variety of interlocking stones, and the way it leans backwards, it actually like leans back like this at an angle. But because of the Peru sits on a fault line, they have massive earthquakes all the time. And if we go by traditional dating, everything that I've mentioned, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, all of those were built in the mid 1400s, according to historians. So we're talking about 5.5, 6 centuries ago that's been standing and surviving earthquakes. And it's because of the way it's built, and because it has no mortar in it. Okay, because it has no mortar, and because it's leaning backwards, and because of those interlocking stones, whenever there's an earthquake, it allows movement, and whenever it stops, they just fall right back into place where they're supposed to be. It's just amazing. They say the biggest stone there weighs 200 tons. It's just an astronomical weight to think that the Inca moved that. I just can't fathom that. Maybe they did. Maybe I don't give them enough credit, and they were amazing people. But maybe I'm cutting them off and not giving them the credit they do. So we had Sacsayhuaman, and then Ollantaytambo. Man, that's a tongue twister there. But it has, they think it was a key, significant part of the Incan administration, religion, and military. Like, it was the center for all of it. And it's at the base of Machu Picchu. And it's basically the gateway to the Sacred Valley. And the Sacred Valley is where they grew most of their crops, and is also like sacred to them. It's like a special place or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, so Ollantaytambo. Whew, man, that's tough. So it was really a center for them, and it was, like I said, it guarded pretty much their food supply. You know, there at the Sacred Valley, which is where they grew the majority of their crops and stuff. So, you know, that was a really significant spot for them. And also, that spot there is thought to be the oldest still inhabited settlement in the Americas. Goes back 9,000 years, they say. People had been living there, you know, that long. Before we get too far off the stone structures and stuff, you know, and like I said, it is completely possible that the Inca built every bit of that in 100 years, like they say they did. If they did, it would give credence to a weird letter that was written by this Spanish guy. I cannot remember his name. This is something I've read years ago. Man, I wish I still had all my books, Chris. But this guy, he had met a mestizo, native, who had told him, when he asked how, you know, people made these, he told him of a plant that was found in the Amazon jungle, and that when you ground it up and mixed it with water and something else, it made this chemical, I guess you would call it, that softens stone. And I've always found that really interesting. I try to keep that in mind when I start talking about ancient civilizations or ancient advanced civilizations that were, you know, there before these other people. That, you know, there are ways that make it possible that they could have done these things. You know, it is 100% possible, and I'm not trying to take anything away from them.
The copper tools work just fine.
Right on. And it would also kind of explain why some of those constructions have a squashed look to them. Some of them look like they kind of been pressed down, like maybe they were softened and then, squeezed in there or something. I don't know. Back off of that and back to the megalithic structures that the Incas may have built. Alante Tambo. Talked about a lot of the significance of it. It's said to be built as a royal estate for Pachacuti, one of the rulers. But in these cases, I think that they get credit for it because they went in and did repair work and stuff, and they kind of put their name on it. I think that happened with the Egyptians a lot.
Who did the original bottom layer then?
That's a great question. My guess is the people who built Kara Supe that I was talking about earlier, the pyramid that's older than Giza. Whoever built Tiwanaku, I think there was a ancient megalithic society that was capable of advanced technologies, and thank you for reminding me of that, because I meant to mention that earlier when you were talking about it. An ancient society that has some kind of advanced technology, wouldn't evolve the same way we would. They wouldn't have the same needs. We went through the Okay. The Industrial Revolution is what I meant. We went through the Industrial Revolution. We created machinery that made our everyday lives easier. We became a mechanical society. We're transforming now into a more electrical, microchip and quantum computer society or whatever that we're going to. But I think an ancient society that, like the one we're possibly talking about here, would have evolved in a different way. And since they were wanting to build with rocks and stuff, their technology was designed around, moving large stones, cutting them, and, the tech that went into it. That was where their technology come from. Or that was the way their technology evolved, not where it came from, I should say. But it's just an interesting subject, but I don't want to take everything away from the Inca, because I think they were responsible for a lot. But since we've said that, might as well hit Machu Picchu. It is one of the clearest sites to me where the Inca get credit for building it, and it's supposedly a royal retreat as well, or possibly a site for the Virgins of the Sun is what they called them. At a young age, really beautiful girls, around 8 or 10 or whatever, would be taken aside, and they would be chosen to be like these priestesses or whatever, and they were called the goddesses of the sun, or virgins of the sun. And the guy who found Machu Picchu in modern day, his name was Hiram Bingham. Ooh, can't believe I remembered that. Proud of myself on that one. It was in the early 1900s, if I remember correctly. He was looking for the city that the last ruler retreated. Well, he didn't retreat to it. They built it, is the way I understand it, when they were fleeing from the Spanish. And it's got a weird name, like, I know what it is. Vivalba or something. I can't remember. Anyway, but yeah, Bingham was looking for that holdout spot, and he ran across, or he was told about some ruins, and he gets to the base of the mountain where Machu Picchu is, and they're telling him, they're at the top of it. So him, his military guide, and the other guy he had with him, those three hike up to the top, and when they get up there, they find one family living there, and a young boy offers to take them to the ruins. And they are, at this point, it's not what you see today, the massive megalithic ruins that are covering the whole mountaintop. it was almost completely overgrown. You could see houses, little houses and stuff here and there and structures, but most of it was overgrown with weeds and stuff. He took thousands of pictures, though. He didn't realize the significance at first because he was really looking for the other place, and he leaves and he comes back. It dawns on him that it might have been more important than what he originally thought, and he goes back and he takes thousands of pictures. And when he gets back, National Geographic publishes 100 or 150 of the photos or whatever. It makes him really famous. It enables him to go back again, and he's the one that thinks that it might have been the Virgins of the Sun that were there, but it has agricultural spots too, but from what I've heard, it could only support 55 people. And there were upwards of 300 to 700 to 900 people living there at a time, which is why they think it was probably more of a religious place or a royal retreat or whatever it was, because you would have to import all the food. You know, they couldn't grow enough to sustain the people that were there. And since talked about Machu Picchu, it has an interesting sister site. I'm going to destroy the name of this, Chris, but I'm going to try. Chaquequirao. I don't know. It's the sister city of Machu Picchu, though. And it's way out. It's on the very, very limits of Peru there towards Bolivia, and it takes 2 days of hard hiking to get to it after you take the last vestiges of civilization behind. You still have 2 days of hard hiking to get to it. The people I saw that went there, they started off in Cusco, right? They rented a prop plane. They took it as far as they could, and then they chartered a helicopter that took them to the last known city there, last civilization, and then they had 2 days of hard hiking to get there. So I mean, it's not a place that you get to easy. I've heard it's well worth the trip if you go, but it's a hell of a place to get to. But
Take me a week and a half to do that too.
You gotta repeat that.
It'd take me a week and a half to make that 2-day hike.
Oh, that was funny, Chris. Definitely. It'd probably take me 2 weeks, so let's be serious. But at this point, they only have they think what they have is 30% of it excavated. So basically, a fourth of it. It's a little over a fourth of it that they've excavated so far. But this is another thing where I think it's a clear case that may not have been the Inca. And besides the previous mentions of stone working and being able to cut it and all that, the whole top of this fucking mountain was chopped off, flattened completely before they built the city. We would have a hard time doing that today with every bit of modern technology we have to level the top of a mountain before you build the city. I mean, and it's so much larger than Machu Picchu. It's just a massive structure, even what they have. That's pretty much what I got on their megalithic construction. They still have walls inside of Cusco, and some of the houses and stuff where you can see the old stones, the megalithic construction, and smaller stuff built on top of it, like you see in Machu Picchu, where it looks like there's 2 and sometimes 3 distinctive layers of architecture. That was the main sites that they inhabited. But when I was talking about the religion and stuff earlier, there was a really weird thing I left out that I do know about, because I say I didn't really study their religion or get that much into their gods and stuff, but the Incas definitely mummified their ancestors, and they had this death worship or death cult.
Did they put their mummies inside of the...
No. Check it out. No. They held banquets for them. They dressed them daily. They had them living with them. They would dress them daily. They would feed them. Set out food for them in front of them. They spoke to them and asked them for advice and treated them if they were still alive. Some of them were granted these vast estates by, the Sapo Inca, the ruler. It really weird. I mean, for our Western way of thinking, I suppose, is a way to put it. Those practices are strange and difficult to comprehend. I can't imagine sitting around with a mummy and speaking to it, or dressing it, or feeding it. But yeah, the death cult was just an interesting thing, and definitely, I think, difficult for us to wrap our heads around, or it is for me. I can't speak for anybody else, but I find it interesting, and here I go again, Egypt. But they had, similar practices, while, they didn't put them into the pyramids like you asked. They still had very similar rituals of how they did the mummification and the way they revered them, and how it was thought to keep them alive. Part of the reason for the Egyptians to mummify their pharaoh and to have the temples was they thought that as long as somebody was worshiping them, saying their name and remembering them, that they continued to live. And it was kind of similar, that was the only reason I bring it up again. But just a definitely interesting side note, more of a religious thing or whatever. But man, what the Europeans did to North, Central, and South America is atrocious. What the United States government did to the natives here is even worse. But millions and millions and millions of people dead from the different viruses and things. That the Incas were already being infected by smallpox and other viruses and God knows what else, salmonella and all the other things that had come over with the first Spaniards. They got there before Francisco Pizarro did. And it's sad, Pizarro, Spanish conquistador, he shows up, and here's another one where you find different accounts. I remember distinctly, and one of the first histories I read of the Inca saying that Pizarro shows up with 134 men and a friar, not a monk, but a Franciscan friar or whatever. One religious person, basically. But I've also heard 132 men. I've also heard 182. But anyway, I'm going to stick with the 134. That's the first number I've heard, and I've seen it again. But anyway, so he has 134 men and a priest, basically. They have like 27 cavalry horses, which was something that the Inca had never seen, just like the Aztec or the Maya. They'd never seen horses before. They, of course, had cannons, muskets, swords, steel. They had armor, so many things. And, the bad thing for the Inca is they had ironically, they had predicted their downfall coming in the year 1532, the same year that Pizarro shows up. And for a long time, like when I was growing up, that's what I was taught, was that they had prophesized their own downfall. So when Pizarro showed up, that they just gave in and said, we give up. But they were in charge of 10 million people. You really think they just gave up? No. The problem was the difference in technology and the way they waged war. It was almost like you or I going and beating up a kid, Chris. I mean, that's the comparison. Because with 130 some odd men, he fucking wiped out, the Incan Empire. Now, that's not completely true, because along the way, just like Cortez, he enlisted the aid of natives. And there were a lot of people. When you build an empire, you make enemies. And he had made, all the Incas had made enemies. The Mayans had made enemies. The Aztec had made enemies. And these conquistadors got with the tribes that hated these people before they went in, and they come in with an army. It wasn't just 130 something people. What they had was 134 well-armed conquistadors, 27 of them on combat horses, dragging cannons behind them. They've all got muskets. They've all got, these bright, shiny swords. And then they've got 10,000 natives behind them. And that makes a formidable force. But there were so many problems with the Inca. Even if they hadn't have foreseen their own downfall, for the 6 years prior to Pizarro showing up, they'd had a civil war. The head Inca had died, and his two sons had basically split control and were both ruling, but neither one of them was ruling the whole empire. One was ruling this, another was ruling that, or whatever. Well, eventually one of them won. As soon as they did, the Spanish just captured him. But the Inca fought on. The Pizarro invaded in 1532 or 1531. I've seen both years. Whenever he showed up, it took until 1572 or so. It took them a long time, to conquer them. It wasn't as easy as the others. It didn't go as quick. Like I was talking about earlier, when Hiram Bingham was looking for Billaboba. I think I said it right that time. I didn't think about it. Anyway, when he was looking for that was the last holdout, they say, of the Inca, that they had retreated and they built that city, and that was the last holdout of it. But as we were saying, there were a lot, just like with the Maya, there were a lot of different contributions to the downfall of the Inca. There wasn't just one downfall. They'd already gotten smallpox and other viruses or whatever before Pizarro even arrived. And then he shows up and he's got these natives that the Inca had already dominated and, had enslaved and probably took captives and for their sacrifices when they needed them. So it wasn't hard for them to gain allies, find people that didn't like them. But there'd been the Civil War too, so they were weakened. But much like the Mayan, when you do that much building and that much deforestation to plant, fields for food, it has effects on weather and weather patterns. And El Nino, the weather event that is right there beside them, just like they did with the Mayan and stuff, they all fell around the same time. The Aztec, the Mayan, and the Inca, they wasn't too far apart. And the weather patterns, they built up their empires along the same time, and they did a lot of deforestation. They could have very well have, helped bring about their own downfall through, major droughts. But, the Spanish were, definitely the major cause of that. But at that point, the Inca were, struggling anyway. Don't know what would have happened after the Civil War had ended if the Spanish hadn't been there. The one brother won, so, it probably would have went on. Odds are. But the Inca definitely had one of the largest empires of the time, and the largest that the Americas had ever seen. Up to 10 million people. That's an estimate, and I think it's a lowball estimate. It could have been double that, quite easily. But we just don't know. All the LiDAR, the light detection and ranging that they're doing, that just strips away the jungle and shows you all the structures underneath. Just the more they do, the more they find. So every day our estimates are going up. So it's interesting to stick with it. But all in all, the Incas were one of the more interesting societies, I think. Pre-Columbian societies, I should say, and I hate that word because you know what I think of Columbus, but I don't think enough of him to even go rant on him. But that's about it for the Inca.
Thank you for listening to Higher Comprehension.